Take it away, RJ.
Yay, we're on. Hello, hello. Another day in a
Hey,
world of.
sorry about that. I bashed my computer over the head with a hammer.
Oh, okay. Well, now we're on the air, so you can bash it in silence. Anyway, welcome to another episode of Evolution Hour and our various guests. Thank you again for Scientist Mel for hosting, and we have Jackson, co-author on little tomes that we've been doing and further projects. We got TD Lane and Tornado Pelt and all of that, and everybody knows what kind of a screwball world everything is, and there's people protesting, and rightly so, and people in government, some of whom are behaving reasonably, and others who have their head up their ass, cranial blockage of the rectum, as we say in the technical biz. We won't be discussing any of that stuff. It's been a blur the last few hours as I've been going on to stuff. I've gotten the mistake of watching Nick Zentner's ridiculously informative geology lectures that he's been doing from his backyard and the cozy fort and stuff, and so that's been occupying time. This is totally off topic, but absolutely fascinating material about whether or not the Baja BC model, that there is evidence that a big chunk of stuff that used to be down in Mexico got eventually up into British Columbia. And the argument now is that there's a gigantic thrust fault that was taking place during the Mesozoic, right around the time that the dinosaurs were checking out, that is pulling those plates apart. And that's why the stuff is ending up in one section. A lot of it's hard to find out, because you actually have to go up to British Columbia to look. And that's in fact what this latest episode of Zentner was about. He's planning on conducting an expedition with a British Columbia geologist to the wilds of North, which is a big 7, 8, 9, 10-hour drive just to get you up into the region of it. Plus it's terribly mountainous. That's where the Burgess Shale is and all of that stuff. So I'm sure he's going to be reporting on that. And it's neat because basically they're keying into cutting edge geology material, at the latest view of how the North American continent developed and what's going on with various terrains and fault lines and blobs of land that get subducted and blopped down and cause mountain arcs to throw up and all that stuff. And that stuff is so far removed from what you get in the creationism venue that it's just absolutely ludicrous. So anyway, we'll probably be covering some of that in future times. And I think a lot of it is going to be in a volume 2 of The Rocks Were There, because we'll be effectively plopping into some of the current geology material, in addition to all of the claptrap stuff about flood geology and genetics. And I was spending time going through, plugging in material on the Kent Hovind and others' argument that the sun has been shrinking over time, and supposedly that means the Earth is young. There's a whole bunch of wacky stuff going on. But anyway, the main topics, of course, are replacing Darwin, Nathaniel Jeanson's work that I'm doing a source analysis on, as I did with the previous one, which means I'm going to be at it for a while because I'm going just little bit by little bit by little bit. Compiling a reference bibliography, which he didn't do. So now I can find out what topics get discussed, what sources get brought in, and what doesn't. At the moment, Jackson, you'll be thrilled to know that Jeanson has now percolated all the way up to 1 source per page average.
A whole source per page?
Yeah, it's just boiling along now.
Oh,
and this is just the early stages of chapter 3, where he's actually gotten some pushback from various critics, and I'll be looking for the points on that. But the funkiness of it is still, it's pretty general at the moment. I only was able to put in a single a reference blip in there, which was on this matter of the Second Law and Lippmann. He brings up a couple of subjects. He's setting up material, and he naturally brings up the thanks to the Second Law of Thermodynamics, they degrade. And he made a footnote to a reference, which was to Fundamentals of Physics from 2001, by the way. And just like I noticed last week, when he referenced a technical textbook, he uses an old edition, even though there were oodles of newer editions available. Well, it turns out his little footnote has a longer blip to it. I didn't put a link up to the whole textbook because alas, it is not available open line. But he says, he quotes, If a process occurs in a closed system, the entropy of the system increases for irreversible processes and remains constant for reversible processes. It never decreases. Bum, bum, bum. And that sentence is still there in the 2018 edition that I downloaded. And
but it doesn't mean that evolution doesn't happen.
They're not talking about evolution. They're talking about like refrigerators and machines and stuff that are totally closed systems thermodynamically. No intimation anywhere in the book. I did a search on that. There's no indication that they even address the issue of entropy in biological systems, because of course that's an open system and therefore it's irrelevant.
It'd be really nice for them to put how much or the entropy in terms of like Gibbs free energy and all of that, but of course we never get to that level. It's just entropy or increasing entropy. That's all they say.
I think he has that bit in there, and I'll see whether he alludes to it again later on in the book, because remember, he doesn't have an index, so I can't find out where he's got stuff. That makes it real laborious. Anyway,
you're surprised they don't have an index?
No.
Are you putting sticky notes in it?
Oh yeah, I got sticky notes all over the
place. Good.
Up in here. Yeah, and masses of material. This and drawing lines. The advantage of owning a book is I can scribble in it. So I
go
can do
wrong.
all the things that wrong. Yeah, and because in the very next paragraph, the reason why I think he's putting this thermodynamic stuff in there is to pander to the mythology. He's not really making a big deal out of it, but yet he drops it. Boop. So that you have it in there, and all his creationist readers will have a little cuddle blanket, and he won't be making a big deal out of it, but he may be making a big deal later on. In the very next paragraph, though, it's another one of those examples of why are you bringing this up? In the decades prior to the 1950s, the fundamental principles of cellular energy management began to be uncovered. Footnote 2, which turned out to be, and I linked to it, in memoriam. About the biologist Lippmann, who died in the 1980s. And it's a perfectly nice in memorial. He had a Nobel laureate. He did a lot of this research, perfectly fine. He's also an evolutionist. And when I did a little search, I wasn't able to put a link to this because it's not open access, but the Fritz Lippmann wrote a paper in 1975 for Biosystems called The Search for Remnants of Early Evolution in Present-Day Metabolism, where he's naturally thinking about how biological systems evolved. And he pointedly is just very keen about the origin of the organelles, although still being disputed, at least for mitochondria, is, I feel, one of the better understood phases of the transition from prokaryote to eukaryote organization by symbiotic inclusion of prokaryotic cells. That's in 1975. He's really early on the mark for accepting that.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that there was such a debate over the existence of the Golgi apparatus, because there were some people who were like,
didn't think it was a thing.
It exists, and other people were like, no, there's no Golgi apparatus. It's like, that's just so
well, that's part of the and there's another matter of that.
Hold on, you have some creationists who'll say that
they weren't creationists.
No, this is the biological thing. You get we allude to it for those of you who haven't gotten the rocks were there. We discussed a lot of these the historical background.
They were
a
just
lot of these issues
regular Joe.
Yeah, because the scientists, often you would have turf wars. You'd have people who were just digging in their heels on their particular mantras, and they didn't want to deal with stuff. And you have to bear that in mind. Scientists are human, and they can have their head up their ass, but the data is another matter. And what you tend to find them is if somebody is trawling older works, as creationists are having a tendency to do, they're playing off of debates that have gotten settled in the years after that, and then they don't bring up that stuff. When I got farther down the page, you're going to love this one. He's got, because chemical mounds of dirt in technical terms,
I'm going to love it.
Energies exist. Chemical bonds aren't spontaneously severed. Proteins help these processes get over the chemical mounds of dirt. Now, in that part where he said proteins help, he puts a footnote up. And I was expecting like a reference. All it said was, and other enzymes. Why the hell didn't he just put that in a parentheses in the sentence? Why did he put it in a footnote? It's pointless.
Can you repeat that? I must have missed what he said. Can you repeat that?
He had a sentence there. It's even a most generic kind of a little blip in there. very, very generic. And he's saying that the whole two sentences, because chemical mounds of dirt, in technical terms, activation energies exist. Chemical bonds aren't spontaneously severed. Proteins help these processes get over the chemical mounds of dirt, which is okay enough. But the point is that one little footnote.
He's just saying. He's saying mounds of dirt is an activation energy, huh?
Yeah, he's using it, and they're in quotation marks, by the way. So it's the idea that the proteins, footnote 3, and other enzymes are the mechanisms that allow all that to happen, which is all going back to the big issue of how metabolism runs and why they're metabolic systems and the evolutionary origin of that, which is a really hot, interesting topic. But what I was perplexed by was the gratuitous uselessness of that bloody footnote at that point, where it isn't helping at all. It's not a reference, and he could have just put it. You know that in my writing with you, once in a while, you'd be putting stuff in a footnote where I go, well, actually, this could be in the main text. But I've never seen you put a 3-word blip at the bottom as a footnote.
For me, if it's not a footnote unless it's more than 2 sentences.
Yeah, and so apparently he hasn't figured out how to use parentheses or semicolons or the dash line or anything like that. So
he needs to read Wonderful Life. Just start peppering everything with semicolons.
So the thing about Fritz Albert Lippmann, which I think the reference in, and it's a good one to read, is creationists often will dangle things they shouldn't bring up, because there I was thinking, okay, who is Lippmann? What does he think? And then you discover what he thinks, and you discover that in fact maybe you shouldn't have brought this guy up, even if it was in a footnote.
That's like what they do with Kunin and that paper, Uprooting the Tree of Life. They never read it
over and over again. Nelson's addicted to it.
They never read the paper. They have never read the paper. It's a perfectly fine paper. They need to actually read it.
I'll tell you, and I'll type into the live feed here. Eugene Koonin. If you have not encountered Eugene Koonin somewhere in the umpteen billion papers that he has either written or co-authored, holy smokes, that guy is prolific. And he did a review in 2009 for RNA of the evolutionary genetic precursors that are involved in multicellularity. And it was like whoa, shit, this is interesting. Because even though I knew quite a lot of the technical material in it, there was stuff that I wasn't aware of. Some of these obscure little organisms and the little genetic systems that was being uncovered about them that I wasn't aware of. And so Koonin has never been other than, he's like Nick Zentner from the geology side. It's something that that you're going to know more when you read their work than you did before. And so that the last people on earth any creationist should try to wave at you is Eugene Koonin. I've even remember our complete nincompoop James Cole was trying to argue that Koonin was undermining evolution in some of his work. You're going, what?
It suggests to me, or does James Cole love being a flat-out denialist?
He's just crazy, I think.
He's just, that's it. He's a complete oddball. And it's borne out by the fact that really he isn't being used by anybody. Once in a while, some obscure journals might actually reference him at some point, and he kind of pops along on the periphery of things. But he's not even relied on in the anti-evolution literature.
Kind of like David Peters.
TD. Tell about this one, Kim.
I applaud your meme, TD. I love it. I retweeted it. I saved it.
Mel, do you want to show it? Because I sent it in the Twitter DM.
This
started because the whale video that we did a response to Long Story Short, retreading Behe and Wells about the whale evolution.
There's a beautiful video, by the way.
That was great.
So we did that, and we got a comment from a person who I never expected we would get a comment from, David Peters. If any of you follow Darren Naish, he's had a couple of interactions with David Peters. Peters is crazy. This is a guy who thinks he can resolve the totality of the vertebrate tree of life with a few characters. And so he
rejects genetic phylogenies.
Yes, he rejects genetic phylogenies. And so he makes these insane trees and then calls everyone else crazy for not just taking his word for it. And so it, for instance, if you're wondering, he said, toothed whales are evolved from tenrecs because they both do echolocation.
When Hone, the systematist that I follow on Twitter, and that's why that thing popped up in my feed. I'm hearing about this when you did it on the last. I go, tenrecs.
Yeah, I actually have. I thought that was so funny. Again, someone else I never expected to comment because I've read his book, The Tyrannosaur Chronicles.
Yeah.
And yeah, he said, well, because according to him, toothed whales are not closely related to baleen whales. Toothed whales come from tenrecs, and baleen whales are evolved from hippos.
Remember, tenrecs are marsupials from Madagascar.
They're afrotheres.
Yeah, well,
they're from Madagascar. They're these little bitty animals, these little bitty mammals, nowhere near related to whales. Like, they're in a separate super order. It's just no.
He's infamous for the pterosaur heresies, where he has this totally screwball notion of where pterosaurs came from, and he doesn't like conventional bird. He's basically a hyper contrarian.
Well, he says
he's
birds
an
are
utter
pterosaurs.
joke. Everybody in there, not only Darren Naish, but his name just suddenly escapes me. It'll probably come to me at some point. But anyway, he has a long series of postings on a bunch of different subjects, and we refer to him in the book on different matters. But he's also made a great deal of pointing out the problems with the pterosaur heresies.
I don't remember who it is, but Peters believes that birds are derived pterosaurs, even though they have like no synapomorphy.
No.
Yeah, the fact is he's so penal about just character traits, trait-based phylogenies only, yet his own trait-based phylogenies completely conflict with all the old trait-based characters.
Well, he doesn't pay attention to most
all
of
the current ones.
No, even the ones that are just about extinct organisms, his phylogenies conflict with those. I think Hone was saying something about even the coding for it is bizarre that he uses to generate trees.
And you don't even have to take our word for it. Just try looking at the physical anatomy of any pterosaur, and any bird, let alone Archaeopteryx, and any theropod dinosaur, and try to think that the birds are more closely related to the pterosaurs than they are to theropod dinosaurs just by looking at the basic anatomy.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely wackaloon, and I'm kind of honored in a twisted way that he found the video and commented on it, but I told him wonder, in the future.
It's always intriguing how people find other people. So is he just spending his nights trawling around for stuff? Is he doing Google search and you popped up and there was your thing on whales? He suddenly had an obsession on whales that day. I mean, how did he come to it is the interesting question, I would think.
Maybe.
Yeah, because I'll let me open up my hood and point out the methodology that I use on finding information. I first off have a network of reliable, interesting sources and unreliable, uninteresting sources that I can use as avenues into things. And I bet you can guess who are the reliable and the unreliable ones. The reliable ones, everybody like Jerry Coyne, I follow him because he is a polymath that jumps onto a lot of different topics on his website. And he's very much maybe on just general science matters. And so he'll often be commenting on current papers, and you can compare that to the way the intelligent designer or the young earth creationist will be riffing off of particular works as well. Those are in the unreliable category. And so that's that. So I have a series of ones that are acting as the avenues. And now with Twitter and social media and the various Facebook groups and things that have on there, I can find out an awful lot about their current field. And plus, this is directly related to the source methods of why we do what we do in the books. It's that we pay attention to what's popping up. If people are bringing up an example and it pops up in a social media, and it pops up on a Twitter feed, it's the Answers in Genesis is making a point of bringing it to our attention. Douglas Axe is really wanting you to know this. And that's something that we should pay attention to.
That one stupid article that they put out there like every week, is atheism a religion? I swear, it's like every week they post that
I think
article.
they got it on like a little thing on their smartphone that says,
They
"Is atheism religion?"
They just schedule it.
They actually asked, "Is atheism a religion?"
Yes, that's
they
standard.
decree that it's a religion.
What?
And their argument is that there are a few legal rulings that we're talking about secular humanism and whether it ought to be treated in certain legal contexts as a belief system comparable to religion in terms of government support for various religions. There's a whole background to it, but they're of course wanting to make everything about an us or them. So the atheism is now a religion. And of course, all of us, we remember when we go to the Church of Atheism and we sacrifice the virgin unicorn on the altar of atheism and all the things. And we went to the atheism parties and did all the little treks along the atheism of a string of roses from the grave of Bertrand Russell. No, we don't do that.
Wait, we don't?
Yeah. My whole thing is atheism does not posit that some supernatural essence of self goes on to survive the death of the physical being to continue on in some other form. Therefore, it is not a religion by definition.
Well,
the boundary layer would be something like Buddhism.
You're thinking about it a lot more than they did.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, you're overanalyzing this tornado.
RJ's it pretty much sums it up as, if we can call it an ism, naturalism, materialism, if we can call it some kind of ism,
ism?
We can throw it across the bridge and say it's against us. And so that's really the entirety of it.
That leads to a question that I have. Would they be willing to call PR? Would they be willing to call a PR a religion because because it can be called a prism?
Give them some time.
I mean, maybe. The funny thing is, the corollary of the argument that atheism is a religion is that theism is also a religion, but that doesn't make any sense. Theism itself is not a religion, so how can atheism be a religion?
Yeah, and that brings us also back to that little buzzword religion, which there are many religionists who deny they are religionists. They say they don't have a religion, they have the truth. Other people's religions are religions, not theirs. And there's a small subset of apologetics, usually creationists, usually Christian, who have that particular attitude. It's not a universal one, but and that's why
I actually met some Hindus who were doing that too, interestingly.
Well, and remember, there's been a movement, particularly in India, of a stridently nationalistic Hinduism that's kind of flexing its muscles, and like all theocracies everywhere, it ain't a pretty sight. And they're a branch of them are trying to argue that there are certain things in the modern science movement that conflict with the Hindu mythologies, and they're trying to downplay that. So this is the same story that we see. Just think Ark Encounter with Ganesh, and you have that kind of construction.
Oh, I was going to comment on something that while you guys are talking about how they'll say, oh, you have a religion, and I have the truth. The thing is, someone actually asked, where's the demonstration going from malicious to man?
Well, that
someone actually said malicious to man.
Ironically, if you get extreme branches of theology, they really do start paying attention to word things like that. And there's a culture that does that in a political context, the Chinese, to where because so many words can have dual meaning because of the phonetic structure and all that stuff, that when somebody would be writing a letter to the emperor, and if you could take a word as a pun that it was an insult, you would treat it as an insult. And so they would get really word parsy that way. So if you have a lot of time on your hands, which is what theocrats often do, they'll tend to move. And Marxists would do exactly the same thing. They would go parsing through what people's views were to find out whether they were measured. They even did it with music, when they would try to find anti-socialist tendencies in Shostakovich's music. And you're going, what?
Oh, and it all started out with that misspelling where they were doing the whole molecules to man thing. And then he says, however you want to state your religion. And then I proceeded to let him have it by saying, sorry, but evolution is not a religion. And here's why. Any religion, and this is Aaron Ra's definition, which I use because, well, it works. Arden Ross stated that any religion defined as such by both its adherents and its critics posits that some supernatural essence of self survives beyond the death of a physical body to continue in some other form. Evolution does not posit such, and is not as such as is not a religion by definition. What you've
To
just
be
made is a
fair,
false equivalence fallacy, and as such, your fallacy counter is at 1. And
no offense to Aaron, but not all religions have survival after death. And that is an evolved, a derived characteristic of most religions. And you could argue that the religions that ended up becoming kind of popular have an afterlife. But it was not at all a universal characteristic ironically, a religion that didn't have an afterlife notion until way late was Judaism, where you were just gone. And the idea that there was some sort of an afterlife is basically a notion that started filtering in the Hellenistic world, because the Greco-Roman world had a kind of a crappy afterlife. You know, most of the Romans thought they were going to be in a kind of holding bin for all eternity, as opposed to the lucky ones that got to go to the Elysian fields, which was kind of like the Disneyland of hereafters. And so that
go to Disney.
Yeah, there you go.
Afterlife Disney.
But and of course the Egyptians had an afterlife notion, and that was one that was according to the rituals. You didn't automatically survive after death. And you might not have a particularly good one if your soul didn't weigh properly against a feather and all that kind of stuff. And then, of course, you had to deal with, well, don't you want to take what you have with you? So you had to have a whole structure then. And the Chinese probably had this very similar notion where, you know, if you want to have your guards in the afterlife, you better make a lot of models of them, and you make talismans, and you make sure that their names are written on them, and you make sure that the rituals are done, and blah, blah. And so all of that accretes over time until you get a whole industrial system of afterlife going on. And whether or not you can afford a first class afterlife or a bargain basement afterlife, you know.
Oh, it gets even better, because
just chunk out the window afterlife.
Yeah.
The person I was arguing against actually said, when evolutionists say squid eggs came from an icy meteor supposedly by an alien race, that's a religion.
No. I hate that so much in every conceivable manner. I know what they're referring to. The fact that that's just as bad as like the aquatic ape hypothesis, or Eugene McCarthy's the pig chimp hybrid.
Oh God, yes.
And I flat out told them nobody in evolutionary biology.
Are we going to be bringing up the pig chimp thing in book 2?
Nobody, we can. If nobody believes it except for the person who if no one believes it except for the person who proposed it, you can't use it as an argument against anyone, because no one believes it. And so nobody believes that the squid eggs are from space. Nobody believes it. Even the people criticized it. No one does.
No.
Their researchers
on top
criticize
of 3 more false equivalencies, I added up 2 straw man fallacies. So he went from 1 to 6 in a single post.
Oh yeah, everybody. I often use the bingo card analogy that when you're dealing with particularly grassroots wackaloons, that they often are really polyglot in what they're glomming onto from lots of different points. And so you can have a little bingo card to see what little things pop out as to whether or not they're going to be bringing up familiar tropes. Anyway, about halfway. So let me thank all my patrons here. That's my one little word file that I kept up in here. Again, I got to thank everybody, given how tumultuous the time are, that everybody is sticking with me. I feel enormously honored from that, every month that money makes a giant difference. And so the fact that not one of you have bailed and a few have even upped the ante on it, I go, thank you. It does me proud on there. And I'm keeping up with all the material. I must say it's nice to be able to afford simultaneously 3 meals a day and ink and paper. That's a nice environment that I'm operating in. And I really enjoy that.
The final volley that I gave him was when he said, you need to wake up from your fairy tale and come back to reality. And then I told him, you need to provide positive evidence that evolution is fake. And you know what he proceeded to do? He didn't provide anything. He just said, evolution fits the religion of the definition of religion to a T. No way of weaseling out of it. And I said, ad nauseum number 5 and false equivalence fallacy number 10. Also, Aw, I'm so sorry. You forgot to provide positive evidence of evolution being a fairy tale. Go directly to jail. Do
Tornado,
not pass go.
Tornado,
Do
the
not
simple
collect
thing to do,
$200.
throw the reptile mammal transition at him, and if he doubts it, throw me at him. And I'm perfectly happy to discuss the subject with him.
No, I said
Tornado.
Basically,
Tornado. I also had a conversation with a creationist that went along similar lines. This guy who's like, the roots of evolution was based is a racist theory, was made to like subjugate people or whatever.
Drink?
I know, but I had a couple of back and forths with him. Basically, I was just kind of like, okay, whatever. And we were supposed to have a debate or in some point in the future. And I said like one sentence to him and he wrote me like a novella. And I wrote back saying, I'm not going to read that. And he got real mad. And so I don't know if we're going to have a debate now.
I suspect it was a long pile of text and not many references in it.
Oh, it had no references. His whole,
exactly.
He's like,
it was just a narrative.
He talks like an Alex Jones type, like, it's just throw everything at the wall.
It's a long tirade, and thank you very much, but time is too short for me to hit my head with a ball peen hammer.
Excuse me, I'm going to basically try something. 9/11, no, I'm not going to go there. No, I'm not going to go there. Fuck that.
Too soon.
Anyway,
RJ, thank your patrons.
To keep the kids.
Yes, I need to. Shut up for the moment, Tornado. I got to thank my patrons. Because I haven't read them off there. I want to thank Hendril and Eric and Benjamin and Speed of Sound and Cirrus and Zeshi at the colleagues level, and our researchers, Travis Adams and Ian Chen. Oh, Ian, you are just astonishing. Convert Me and Eat Meal and James Fitzwater and Harris Minor and Ralph McFadden and Apologia, who's running amok there, the bête noir of Ken Ham. Our assistant researchers, Mike Apple and Durango and Totus Real. Our friends Daniel and Steve Bauman, our geology guy, make sure that all of our material is uber correct on the geology. Mary Gail Beddoes and Insects Are Cool and Devin Reeves and Morton Nielsen and Paul Papagus and Bo Rasmussen and Alex Stone and Paul Williams. And I will again thank legacy patrons Jen and Jody and John and Keith and Andrew and Dyer, Uwe, Mona, Brad, Staggles, Sun Sky Stone, Ugly Trum and Truls, Everett, and Stuart, who have been helping at one point or another. So there's that element there. So now, Tornado, what was the point that you were itching to present?
Yeah, basically, to be able to string together a long thing of conspiracies, Mountain Dew is a conspiracy to keep the kids awake so that they don't question whether chemicals in the water turn the frogs gay and whether chemicals in the water also make, water.
Oh, yeah. The one thing you discover if you dive into really murky, weird pseudoscience, the people who think that the earth is hollow and we live on the inside, the ones that think
we live on the inside?
Yeah, there's a
I thought at least we'd live on the outside and there'd be like mole people on the inside.
Exactly. And so you've got some of these really wackaloon views. You'll see common threads in it. There's a tendency to keep the caps lock up on a little too much. There's a tendency not to work through like documentation.
Okay, but RJ, why would they take the harder route of arguing we're on the inside when they could just argue we're on the outside?
I know. Well, there you go. You see, this differentiates them from the normal hollow earthers where we're on the outside. That's too boring.
I guess. It's like, what?
And you find elements of this. Well, it's the reason why some of this stuff is creepy is because it can now intersect with extremists in other contexts. That we live on the inside of the hollow earth bit, that stuff fits into some of the Nazi ideology. And there was a whole bunch. I'm trying to think of what the damn name of it was. There was a German term for this weird little Abendlehrer society or something like that. That was a collection of really nutball wackaloons in Germany in the 1920s and 30s. It had close connections to the Nazis, and Heinrich Himmler fit into that framework. And so they were the Alex Joneses of the 1920s and 30s. And there was often a lot of connection to extremist political philosophy and extremist hatred, racism, and all that kind of stuff. And you still find that in the dynamic today, that if you look at the people that are putting the most indefensible creationism They are at the most extreme political end of the anti-evolution spectrum, which is already conservative to begin with, and then it moves past Kant-Hovian extremism down into that little murky land of Rosus Rushdoony and people who think that the United States is a fiction and they need to set up a new theocratic republic, and that QAnon is waiting out there to give us the secrets of Donald Trump, and Alex Jones with the gay frogs and all of the other stuff.
I was literally just about to make an Alex Jones.
Oh, you thought you made that up? No. That Alex Jones was arguing that there were stuff that was being added in that were turning frogs gay.
I got
this was part of a thing.
I got a joke.
It's all
they're putting chemicals in the water that turn the frogs into reptiles.
If you are as old as I am, you will know that there's almost nothing that is so preposterously stupid that somebody won't think about it. That they won't imagine it.
Yeah.
That we've discovered in our own frame. You and I have both bumped into people where you go, holy moly, I never thought there would be this layer of dumb.
I was on Peter's show yesterday with Erica, and we mentioned how Purdom and Hodge make the crocoduck argument in that we document in chapter 5. And I said, I didn't have a whole lot of respect for Georgia Purdom in the first place, but I thought at least her genetics background should prevent her from making the crocoduck argument.
Exactly. But yet it doesn't.
I expected nothing and I was still disappointed. So
the crocoduck argument, let me guess, is that where they ask you? We don't find a crocoduck, therefore evolution is fake. Is that
except they did it for dogs and cats. They said we don't find any dog cat hybrids in the fossil record.
Yeah, which would be exactly the opposite.
Actually, that's wrong.
Well, no, actually it's I know what you're going
in the
for,
sense
but
they're using it.
It is
wrong. They want an actual 50-50-ish.
Yeah.
Mixture in the,
not a
it's the Photoshop DAC or cog.
Yeah, not a Miacid. They're talking about the front half is a dog and the back half is a cat.
Yeah,
well, that's just stupid.
This is a trope that goes way back because probably the earliest example that I can think of in the anti-evolution literature is Duane Gish's infamous cow whale.
Oh that messy to blowhole. Yeah,
that has a whale in the front and a cow's udder in the back end of it.
Actually, now that I think about it, what do whale teats look like?
There we go. And do you want to get close enough to find out?
I'd like to say that Duane Gish's debates, does he bring up the cow whale in all of them?
Probably.
I don't know in all of them, but he certainly brought it up a lot, which was why people would comment on it. And the slides, I think, have been preserved in various websites from people who have criticized it. I think it's
so. I guess Duane Gish
at Talk Origins.
From what I hear, every single one of Duane Gish's debates was an utter catastrophe.
Oh, poor boy.
Boot tornado. Mel, do it.
Continue the bad jokes.
But yeah, Gish is Gish operates. A lot of you out in the audience won't really be familiar with Duane Gish because you're young people, not the old farts.
He perfected the Gish Gallop.
Yeah, but he was in
he established it. Kent Hovind perfected it.
Kent Hovind moved into a newer level because, for one thing, Kent Hovind speaks way faster than Duane Gish did. I've seen Gish speak on occasions in videos. Oh no, he's died in 2006, I think.
Oh, I would have loved to have taken him on just to see how the smarter kids nowadays can.
I think he was one of those people.
Gish was a formidable debater. Gish had a debate with Hugh Ross back in the 1990s and cleaned Ross's clocks. Ross is nowhere, we've known from our interactions with Ross, is not a quick thinker. And the fact that Gish can move, that's what the whole point about the Gish Gallop is. He was extremely good. He was a very agile manipulator. I had no respect for him. I regarded him as the most shameless manipulator of science information that I'd ever seen. Because he did bump into a lot. Remember, Gish is literally the only anti-evolutionist who actually mentions the Cro-Magnethids by name.
Well, debates are just all rhetoric anyway. I don't know of any debates where I've left feeling like I actually learned anything. So
Well,
Arnra
that
versus Kent Hovind.
I didn't learn anything from that. I didn't. I learned not one
Well,
thing.
I did. I
Which
learned
is?
that if you can get Kent Hovind to admit that he doesn't know, or actually no, that would be Conspiracy Cats versus Kent Hovind. Where
I
you
didn't watch that
learn
one.
that Kent Hovind actually does have some honesty, where he admits, "I'm not prepared for that."
Well, I've seen that. I've seen that one clip, but
Oh.
I have no.
Yeah, he doesn't say he's wrong. He just said, I'm not prepared for that.
And he admits
There's
that he
no
doesn't
reason
know
for me to watch
anything
Kent
about
Hovind
it.
debates.
Yeah, there's a legitimate argument that goes on in the anti-creationism philosophy as to whether it's a good idea to have debates at all. And I'm a divided mind on it. Part of the argument is you're giving the nitwit a public venue, in the same way that when Donald Trump meets with Kim Il-jung over in North Korea, you're giving a gravitas to the thing that wouldn't have been in otherwise. The opposite of that is if you're dealing with somebody that has a following and has a lot of people that are just itching for him, the idea that you don't stand up to that and openly defend the opposite approach is relevant. And I, on my part, guess what, wanted to use source methods. So that was my view, is that in that the object is to demonstrate, not to Kent Hovind, because nothing's going to demonstrate anything to him, right off the mind shell, or for that matter, their extreme followers. But there may be people watching in the audience who need that extra little spurt to where they're looking at the Hovind galloping, and they're looking at me, and they may be spurred to go fact check and look that up and get started with that. And in that sense, then I would feel that I have been successful, because I've prodded them on. Don't take my word for it. Don't take the creationist word for it. Check it out on your own. Plus,
and buy my book.
Yeah, well, that's another matter there.
The guy who I'm supposed to be, I actually used debating rather than discussing, because he's probably a Kent Hovindista, because he will not accept a discussion. He only wants a formal debate, which is what the Hovindistas always say. They won't accept anything less. So,
well, and there too, remember, he's a preacher, and Kent Hovind has his preacher patter down. A discussion requires him to improvise, and we know Kent is really not good with improvising science information at the drop of a hat, because he only knows in quotation marks the stuff that he has rehearsed in the patter, and that's why he falls back. The reason why I feel that my debate with Kent Hovind was a success is I derailed him from his PowerPoint.
Now,
I threw him off his argument.
RJ, would you say I'm good at improvising science information off the fly? Because remember, I was basically sitting there calculating that whole issue regarding the ice meteor and how it would basically completely ruin the...
a lot of people can do. A lot of people can do quick calculations and material, and it's the hardest thing to do is to be able to respond real time against a running gish galloper like Kent Hovind.
Tornado, do you do debates?
Up his 6 levels of evolution, it's like, by the way, on your 6 levels of evolution, 1, that's rapid cosmic inflation, not evolution. 2, the second thing you bring up there is nucleosynthesis, and we humans have exploited that, so you can't say it's religious, which means you're lying out your ass. 3, we have observed star and planet formation and the issues regarding it, so you can't say that's not science, that's religious.
Tornado, either. Do you do debates?
No.
Well, give it a whack.
Have you thought about it, or a discussion with a anti-evolutionist or something, or is that just not something you'd be interested in?
Well, I'd love to. It's just I'm not sure how well I'd be able to handle my emotions if Kent just completely keeps repeating the same.
Well, it doesn't have to necessarily be with Kent. It could be with someone else.
Yeah. And frankly, as I did in my debate with Kent Hovind, I took advantage of the fact that he goes by a structured debate. Because unlike a conversation, in a structured debate, the debater has to shut up while the other one talks. So you have a complete platform to operate. And the main thing is to make sure that you can be structured to fall within the time frame effectively. Then it becomes improvisational in how you respond on the fly in the rebuttal section. And then I love, of course, Q&A, where people can start asking the questions on there. And that's when I want to show that I know not only more about the science subject than Kent does, but I know more about creationism than Kent does. By the way, BJ, I got to point up BJ in the feed. She says that she learned while watching the Bill Ludlow debate. And given what I remember from Bill Ludlow's debate with Kent Hovind, he was really on the ball on that because he had studied Kent Hovind. He had slides prepared directly responding to Kent Hovind's pattern. And Kent Hovind, being a repetitive boob, repeated the same shtick the next debate that Ludlow was all prepared for. So yes, you learn an awful lot about information in there. And if I'll say this, anybody debating with a creationist that cannot present new information that will cause somebody watching it to go, wow, I didn't know that, and maybe start looking for it, then you're failing as a debater, because you need to not just repeat patter, you need to present newer material, and that means you got to be up on it. So I'll say this to everybody that wants to go into a debate mode, and everybody that I've interacted with that's been in debate mode, I make these pointers to them, is know your opponent. This is really advantageous, as Jackson knows, and others, when we're dealing with people like Standing for Truth and others. These people are very repetitive, so that you can,
for lies.
Yeah, you can watch their work and you can see what their argument is, because they're very reluctant to present new information. So if you don't know their argument as well as they do, that means you haven't been studying them.
And grab books off the shelf.
Yeah. And that's the other bit, is then when you do have the ability to improvise on the fly, source methods gives you an entree. That when I had my debate with Standing for Truth on that, do dinosaurs and people coexist, and he was bringing up his PowerPoint that he had all prepared with all of these pictures of supposed people and dinosaurs together and people hunting plesiosaurs and all of that. And I played the source methods card. Oh, interesting. Where did you get that information from? And it was like, source methods get him to admit where the book was. And he then said, well, I have it. Well, then go get it. Let's talk about it. And that is where his argument started to run off the rails when I found out who it was. Vance. Yeah.
Yep. Who made, I'm pretty sure he's like the creator of the stupid Jade Montana Ceratops, because he's like the only person who has it. I'm pretty sure he made it. So
yeah. But RJ. Can an elephant mate for pine tree?
Yes.
Yeah. There you go.
Absolutely.
There you go. And that's another bit about. That's another one, is that given somebody like Kent Hovind using tropes so methodically, so relentlessly, you got a real deal with it. Oh, and I do not want, because we've been distracted by so many. I think
there's a joke about woods somewhere in there.
Yeah, there was a second half to the show, which now we're only 10 minutes to go. So I put a bunch of links up. I mentioned Douglas Axe earlier, and that was for a sneaky reason, because Douglas Axe just a little ways ago has been prattling on about COVID. And his arguments about why his one piece that he put up on April 15th, our heroic efforts to stop the coronavirus could be great pain for little gain. So he was basically arguing that it was a bad idea to keep the economy closed up too long, because we were going to have to, we should be opening up much, much more loosely. Now, remember, he's an intelligent design advocate. Therefore, you can wonder, is he applying the same source data myopia that he does in his anti-evolutionism to his politics? So I have a bunch of other stuff here that I put some links up to. He had a thing where
he's a conservative,
politically conservative. In fact, I don't know anybody in the Discovery Institute orbit who is politically liberal. And in fact, it's difficult to think of an
anti-evolutionist. I guess I don't know either.
And this is a thing that's you have a complete political mix with the evolution side. That you have flaming left-wingers and communists all the way to extremely politically conservative people. It's across the spectrum. Not so for anti-evolutionism. And I can tell you that, to my knowledge, the number of non-politically conservative anti-evolutionists is one, William Jennings Bryan. That's the only one I can think of often.
Yeah, that's right. He was a Democrat, yeah.
Well, not merely a Democrat. He was a leftist Democrat. He was in favor of breaking up big companies. He was a pacifist. He would be marching with Bernie Sanders politically.
So a guy who lived 100 years ago is our only example.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. Because I keep close tabs on this kind of thing. It's part of the tip research thing, because when you see one or two or three examples of the political conservatism, that's interesting. But when you see 100, 1,000, that it's ubiquitous, that you can measure and that's why I describe anti-evolutionism as culture camp, conservative, religious. All three of those things are operating together. It's not just religious, because you can be an evolutionist and be religious. It's not just politically conservative. George Will, political conservative, but he's not religious, and he's not an anti-evolutionist. And then that culture camp, that culture war aspect, that they're trying to restore America to its greatness. And so that keys in with MAGA and all these other bits. And that's why Trump has been able to feed into that creationist Tony Perkins. You want to see, if you want to see the culture camp network in play, just follow Tony Perkins and the Family Research Council and all the little connecting threads of that bunch. And you'll meet all the players.
I don't remember who it was who once said, if you want to sanction, if you want to sanction bigotry, just put family in the name.
Oh, yeah, there it goes. Anyway, so I put the things up. He's got, there's a posting to a respected science watchdog who wrote a recent paper where he was arguing that the supposed dangers of COVID-19 have been overestimated. And there's been huge pushback from epidemiologists on this. And so this is some stuff from Ioannidis from just this year. So this is the small bunch of who you would think of as your kind of David Berlinski-ish contrarian branch of epidemiology that Ioannidis would reflect that.
And he's Fiducia of epidemiology.
It would be kind of like that.
The
and
David
so
Peters
they're sucked up. It becomes a political matter because it gets approved by the people who are in the Trump orbit. And as we can see, it's being approved by the people in the Discovery Institute orbit, because they're culture camp, conservative, religious. So I follow along on about these things. And that's why these things have political impact, because even though somebody at the Donald Trump level never has ever mentioned evolution, I know of no examples of it, because he's a scientific illiterate and has the curiosity of a doorknob. So he has no interest in any of that stuff. But
I think the only time he ever crossed it was at one of the first Republican conventions during the or as it was leading up to the election. I think that was it. That's the only time I've ever.
And even some of the ones who are definitely anti-evolutionists don't make a big deal about it. Jay Sekulow from Pat Robertson's legal arm, which is the American Center for Law and Justice, and Sekulow is now counselor to the President of the United States and was in the Senate hearings on the impeachment. So these things connect up.
Let's not forget Mike Pence.
Let's not forget Mike Pence. These are all generic anti-evolutionists. They're not necessarily young Earth creationists, although Sekulow did defend a young Earth creationist and lost miserably back in the 1990s, and that's why they've never taken an anti-evolution case ever since. I've got a section on all that in tip 1.7. Shameless plug, tip 1.7. Go over to my website, pay attention to all this stuff. It's there for a reason. Anyway, there's WordPress.com. Anyway, tip 1.7 is on creationism in its revivalist mode down to the modern times, and up to at least the Dover trial. And you've got a lot of the dramatis personae in there. Some of them float in and out of things. Mark Meadows, who is a Ken Ham groupie, and he was in Congress, and he ends up as the chief of staff for President Trump. So there's a whole bunch of interconnections going on here. I doubt there's ever going to be a moment when Donald Trump is going to talk about therapsids with Mark Meadows or Jay Sekulow. That's never going to happen. But the kind of bad methodology that can lead somebody to be an anti-evolutionist will connect up in new layers. And as a methods issue, you have a different dynamic when you have things involving anti-vaxxers, where now you have a much broader political range, and you can find extreme leftists who are anti-vaxxers and extreme conservatives who are anti-vaxxers.
I would find it hilarious if he said, therapsids. I have all the best therapsids.
Oh yes, all the best therapsids. Oh, the thread here. I'll be snarky political. The career arc of somebody in the Trump administration. I pick all the best people. He's the bigliest, best person ever. Then something happens where he's starting to be a liability, or she, but it's mainly he's. So then it becomes, I don't know that person. I never met them. I don't know anything about them. And they were always an anti-Trumper. Then it finally gets to that point. So there's a perspective as you move along, because he's now been dumping on Mattis, his former Secretary of State, who he's now decrying. And so that's the
Don't
tragic
forget Jeff
thing.
Sessions. He's also been dumping on the racist little elf.
Oh yeah, and Sessions is going to be a fascinating thing to deal with Alabama. It's a swing state, and the other matter is the fact is that there's now animosity between the two. Can they ever? Will circumstances get dicey enough that Trump and Sessions can bury the hatchet other than in each other's back? I don't know.
Yeah. But by the way,
forgot about Jeff Sessions
from Beach Price, or BJ. I don't know. I'm going to rephrase this a little bit to make it roll off the tongue a little bit better. Jackson's next video: whale nipples.
Whale nipples.
Yeah.
Well,
I
mean,
that's
whale.
And by the way, there was some additional discussion about William Jennings Bryan. Yes, the fact that I allude to that in, I think.
What have I done? What have I allowed?
Tip 1.6.
You brought this upon yourself.
Yes, you shouldn't have brought up whale penises.
Actually,
there you go.
Paul brought this upon ourselves.
Yeah, it's all Paul's fault.
Elaine, just so you know, I did send you.
Oh, she says yes. Either Beej or BJ. Anyway, William Jennings Bryan did in fact die right after the Scopes trial, and an ironic bit that I referred to in my own work. He had actually got a retirement mansion. He had actually had a lot of good investments that he was making. So like Bernie Sanders having a good portfolio, you know. Anyway, he bought a place down in Florida, which was in the midst of its giant land boom. And as it turns out, had he not died when he did and lived into it, he would have been hit with the big hurricane. So ironically, there was an inherit the wind aspect to the destruction of his house in Florida.
Well, whoops.
Ironies of life there. Yeah, William Jennings Bryan is a fascinating character, a brilliant politician, and a very principled person. He quit when Wilson was being belligerent against the Germans because he was a pacifist, and so he just said, "Bye, I'm quitting."
I do remember there was that show Quanda. I think it's like an Australian show, or the guy who hosts it sounds Australian. They actually had one of the people they had on one of their panels, I remember because Richard Dawkins was on it, was the Christian Democrats or something like that. And so I don't remember anything else about them. I just remember that they existed. And I thought,
in Europe, you have a totally different dynamic when it comes to what
it was the American Party.
Then they're asterisk. The Christian Democrats are so minuscule. I haven't even heard of them. I think the socialist. I think the socialist. No, as a party, not Christians and not Democrats.
It was
Christian
a party.
Democrats as an actual party label.
Let me look this up. Okay, I'm curious.
Yeah, because you've got we have just basically Democrats and Republicans in Europe, and in a lot of other nations, they do have these nomenclature of Christian Democrats and others that are actually maybe a conservative party, maybe a liberal party, depends on the thing. And the Germans in particular are screwball in their weird oxymorons, which connects up with the Nazis because remember, it's National Socialist German Workers
I found
Party.
it. The Christian Democrats of America.
There we go.
.org.
And they bet they've had like 5 votes.
Giving you a new voice, defending the least of these, revealing hypocrisy, fostering change. Do not oppress the widow or the fatherless, the foreigner or the poor. Do not plot evil against each other.
Well, that's a nice policy, but nevertheless, they are so obscure.
Take action against the Trump administration. There you go.
There you go. Yeah. Well, you've got a lot of people that fall into some weird backgrounds with Trump. By and large, creationists are giddy with enthusiasm for Donald Trump, but there are exceptions. Paul Dubuisson and John Mark Reynolds. Paul Dubuisson is just the lower echelon nutball online.
Paul Dubuisson can't even honestly answer whether or not rocks float.
Yeah. Yes, indeed.
Well, they have a Christians Against Trump shirt.
Yeah, and you have a group, both the Log Cabin Republicans and now the Lincoln Project, which are people who are trying to salvage the Republican Party from the dumpster fire that is the Trumpistas. Yeah, well, I don't know. It can go many ways. We've gone through these things before. Remember, the Republican Party didn't always exist. It occurred from the wreckage of what happened as Andrew Jackson died, and you ended up with all of the anti-Jackson people in the Whig Party, which was just a kind of a amalgam of people who can't stand Andrew Jackson. And it involved John C. Calhoun, who was a Southern secessionist.
They're pro-abortion.
Yeah. And those blobs then started to fragment, and one blob, the anti-slavery wing of it, began to coalesce around that issue and form the Republican Party that suddenly percolated up as the shit was impending to hit fan by 1860. And it was kind of like a come out of blue. Abraham Lincoln, a minor little character, suddenly becomes the head of the party. And could you imagine that sort of person being today if you had television? I mean, he probably had a high squeaky voice. He was gangly and odd and all these features that they would have gone after him like nobody's business. He wasn't a svelte, smartass kind of person like Stephen Douglas.
RJ, can I read this one sentence?
Oh, go ahead.
Throughout all of Scripture, and especially in the teachings of Jesus Christ himself, the importance of caring for the poor, sick, vulnerable, and marginalized in our society is highlighted as the number one priority of our personal service and national concern.
Yeah, well,
So-
there's a wing of Christianity that can say that with a straight face.
So there you go. There. That's the Christian Democrats of America.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And of course, how much of the Jewish vote they're going to get, I don't know. Anyway, we've gone a little bit past the hour on things. I think we've covered all the little questions on there. I did get in our truncated second half that got time dilated down to like 10 minutes on Axe and the COVID-19 thing.
Excellent quip, RJ.
Yeah. The fact is that source methods is a universal toolkit that you should be applying in all ways, in all manner of your dealing on every subject matter whatsoever, that you carefully vet sources, that you want to have reliable sources, that you are bearing in mind what is really kind of solid and what are contentious potential issues, like the thing about the geologic landscape that's cutting edge material, and to be able to keep all of that straight. And I think one thing that's popped up in all the different people that we've interacted in debates and others is that the Tortugan mind is really bad at that kind of differentiating, that it's a top-down dogmatism approach, whereas I'm saying, okay, let's do the thing they can't do, which is the bottom-up source methods approach, to where you arrive at your data field with a sound method, and then you
It's also Tornado's approach.
Yeah, you interpolate philosophy rigorously.
Wait, my approach?
It bottoms up.
Yeah.
You always say drink. Sorry.
Drink. Oh, I tell you, you and Jackson, you and a Tornado are going to have to do a joke off.
No, please, no. I might.
Scientist Mel is sitting there trying to suppress utter chagrin. I think you better pull the plug on the show tonight. Here, we have wreaked enough damage.
No. You want to pull the pug.
The pug. A cute little pug.
I
That sounds grossly inappropriate.
I agree.
I have a statement to make.
And we will agree.
Which is regarding the current state of the country. We are all humans.
Yeah.
And the very idea that humans in the area of law enforcement will be unduly violent to other humans based purely on the amount of melanin in their epidermis is a sickening reality in our country that needs to change in the future.
Or worse,
as soon as possible.
That you would have tear gas thrown at you for protesting these issues, regardless of the degree of melanin in your epidermis, solely for the purpose that a fat tub of lard would come out and wave a book he's never read in front of a boarded up church, even though the people who ran the church were appalled by that.
Did you hear he said, they said, is that a Bible? Or is that the Bible? He said, it is a Bible.
It is a Bible. Oh, yeah.
Or no, so that is your Bible. That's what they said.
We're running slightly over on here, but I can't let this pass. James Corden had a hilarious and poignant bit on his show that comes on after Colbert every night. And he was doing a bit where they were looking at, on this very issue, an interview I think Bloomberg TV had with Trump back during the election time when he was running for president. And they were trying to ask him about the role of the Bible in his life. And because he had said that this was his favorite book, the Bible. So they asked him, well, what parts
Did I
of
write
it?
that one?
What parts of it? And he was saying, oh, all of it. Well, can you be a little more specific? Well, that's a very personal thing. So, well, Old Testament versus New Testament, which is more dominant? Well, I like them both. And
I know them personally.
And Corden stopped and said, listen, this is the classic example of the kid who has not read the book, who's trying to give the book report. We all know that exactly how it is. And I have done a book report where I was bullshitting when I hadn't actually read the book. So I know exactly what it looks like. And he's absolutely right. And then to add sweet insult, James Corden brought out his dad in quarantine over in London, who, by the way, is a kick-ass saxophone player. He would often appear on the show, and he and his mom are just sweet, and the whole family is a bunch of sweet cakes. But anyway, he's a very religious man. So he showed, first of all, how you should carry a Bible and the various modes you can do, including under the arm so that you can, and various things. It was hilarious. But anyway, then he opened it up to Psalms and read one of his favorite Psalms. And this was the difference between him and Trump, because I know real Christians and he's a real Christian. Christians have favorite passages that they remember. It's stuff they guide their life by. The notion
you can literally
exactly
every yak has a favorite passage
from memory.
Like.
The notion that when point blank asked about it, that Donald Trump couldn't even give any examples from the Bible about how it affected his life meant no, he doesn't read the Bible.
RJ, the 2 Corinthians went to Mar-a-Lago.
Yes, the 2 Corinthians.
Yes, of course.
Exactly.
There are very fine people in both the Old and New Testament.
In the New Testament, yes.
Very fine people.
Yes,
I do have a favorite sort of passage. It's a joke passage, but I like it very much, and it's actually true. Compressions 8.7 verse 1. He who is without oil shall throw the first rod.
I actually quote the Bible. One of my favorite passages, I think, is from Matthew, the one where as ye sow, so shall ye reap. I think that's an extremely useful bit.
That's one of the bits.
As ye snow, so shall thee melt.
There is an awful lot of perfectly valid and interesting philosophy lurking around in the Bible, and I love that part.
I laughed at that. I'm sorry.
What, the joke I said?
I shouldn't have laughed at that. Oh my gosh. That just caught me so off guard.
Oh, and if you're cribbed for time, the shortest passage of the Bible is 2 words, I think also in Matthew. Jesus wept. So if you're really short for time and you need a really compact, I think even Donald Trump could remember 2 words, maybe without mispronouncing them.
I think the only 2 words he remembers are Donald Trump.
Maybe he'll look up the oranges of those phrases and find out more about them.
Yes.
Look, yeah.
We're causing scientist Mel to shake her head again there.
Yeah, let's pull the plug.
Yeah, and see you all next week, gang. Everybody stay safe. If your local area is doing protests and stuff, most of those are still going on peaceably. But who knows? Emperor Donald may fly in the army.
Protest because I prefer to sit inside where I don't have to risk coming into contact with people.
Well, we know that there are some people that were just out on their porch and policemen were shooting paintballs and rubber bullets at them, and so this can be terrible. Yeah.
Well, I've been to one. Out on my porch, it's going to be in a sun chair, drinking Mountain Dew with my chest bare and getting a suntan.
I have been to one protest ever. I went to a climate change rally, which was downtown, and there were like Confederates and neo-Nazis across the street, and that was scary.
And they were like pro.
They had death. The funny thing is, it turns out there were because I forgot where the courthouse was, and I was driving downtown. It's like 25 miles per hour, and I'm like, where is the court? Oh, Nazis, there it is. and because there were apparently 2 different rallies that were scheduled at the same time. They had
stereo.
The removal of the statue, which has some Confederate people on it, which is downtown. Oh, yeah. There was that one, and also the climate change rally were at the same time. So you had a bunch of like teenagers with signs on one side of the street and old men with Confederate flags on the other.
I don't think you can throw a dead cat in any town in Dixie without hitting a Confederate statue somewhere.
Yeah, Jackson, you did not see that coming.
Boot TD, boot him.
Also, a quick note to remember: there is a quite important distinction between the alt-right neo-Nazis, sore loser Confederates, and just plain out racists that you see, especially in like Trump base.
Oh, I don't care. I remember Charlottesville. Whenever I see them converging in one place, I get worried.
But I'd make it a little point here. There's a fine distinction between them and the libertarians that also quite like their guns, that think, oh, hey, this is a time to take out the country right now.
Yeah, you've got a variety of elements involved. Donald Trump's form of racism is extremely specialized. It's people who are the wrong sorts, that have the wrong skin color, that don't buy rooms at his resorts.
Have we forgotten about the time he said, "There's my African American"?
Yeah. Well, let's not forget as well, the reason why I keep on bringing up Roy Cohn is back in the 1970s, he was in a huge lawsuit over discrimination at the apartment block that he and Daddy were running. And Roy Cohn was one of the lawyers there. And to show you just how serious this was, Roy Cohn couldn't even get him out of it. They lost, and they had to pay a huge fine. Ugh. Of course, Trump immediately went outside and bragged that he'd actually won the lawsuit, which is typical Roy Cohn.
We only lost a small loan of $1 million.
Pigeon chess. Arguing with Trump is like pigeon chess.
Yeah.
You pulled the plug, right?
Not yet.
Not yet. We're just she's watching this slow-mo train wreck go on.
Well, you know, Tornado.
So I can grab some food.
You know, Tornado. After they lost, all they had to pay was a small loan of $1 million.
Okay,
yeah.
I'm pulling the plug. You
pull
guys behave
the
now.
plug quickly, scientists. See you all next week.